If you are thinking about starting a side hustle, or you have started a side hustle, then today's video is for you, as I'm going to tell you how to avoid being the 60% of side hustles that fail and go bust within the first 3 years. To do this, I'm going to summarize 4 key lessons that you need to know from this amazing book, The EMyth Revisited by Michael Gerber, and I highly recommend that you read it once you've watched this video. Before that, a quick history lesson. Today, Medix Money is a thriving side hustle that's helping thousands of doctors to make better financial decisions. We're expanding into dentists and nurses, and things are going really, really well. But at least twice in the very recent future, Medix Money could have completely failed, and I'm going to tell you about how we avoided that today and the key lessons that I learned in that process. Lesson number 1. In the book, Michael Gerber introduces the concept of what he calls the E-myth, or the entrepreneurial myth. And that suggests that most business owners are not true entrepreneurs, but rather technicians in their own business. And what does he mean by technician? Well, the example that he gives is of Sarah, who is a really talented baker and opens up her own bakery. But Sarah ends up completely overwhelmed by the day-to-day operations of the bakery, and that leaves her no time to focus on strategic planning and business growth. Basically, Sarah makes great cakes, but she lacks the business skills to grow the business and ultimately make it successful because she is a technician and not an entrepreneur. So that is the essence of the E-myth. He defines a technician as someone who works in the business day to day, whereas an entrepreneur works on the business. And this is a key concept in the book, really, to spend more time working on the business and not in the business. But you're thinking, well, I've just started. How can I start working on the business when there's only me? And I definitely sympathize with that. When Medix Money started, it was just me and Ed, and we were doing all of these jobs. We were the technician doing the day-to-day thing. We were the managers, managing the situation, and we were the entrepreneurs trying to think about how we could grow the company. And so in the cake example, the technician would be making the cakes. The manager might be ordering the flour. And the entrepreneur will be thinking, okay, how can I grow the business? How can I sell my cakes in more markets? Could I sell my cakes online? Could I open up another bakery in another town, for example? And I guess the Medix Money example of that would be the technician would be editing the YouTube videos like this. The manager would be scheduling the order of the content. And the entrepreneur would be thinking, okay, our podcast has got 750,000 downloads. The website's going incredibly well. Why don't we open up another channel like YouTube, for example, which is exactly what we're doing. So if you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe because it helps us to grow. And so related to this, Michael Gerber goes through the 3 stages of the maturity of a business, and he calls this infancy, adolescence, and maturity. And most businesses fail going from infancy to adolescence. And the reason is because the technician cannot transition to becoming an entrepreneur. And that's something that we've definitely struggled with at Medix Money, and I'm going to tell you a bit more detail about that. But first of all, those 3 stages. So infancy, the owner, the owner of the business plays a technician role, working hard to complete tasks and launch the business. The owner and the business are closely tied. If the owner of the business was to leave, the business would fail because basically the owner is the business. You probably don't have any employees at this stage. We certainly didn't. And you are probably doing the lion's share of the work. Burnout at this stage is a huge risk because you think you're going to escape and live the side hustle dream, but somehow you end up doing more hours than you originally were at your job that you tried to escape from. So this is where a lot of businesses fail, at the infancy stage. They just can't transition from the business owner working in the business as a technician making cakes. The next stage is adolescence, and in adolescence the workload increases, and this is where you need to start delegating and seeking help and maybe hiring employees. And doing an organization chart here sounds really boring, but it really helped us. It's just a chart which shows that who does what basically. And another thing that really helped us here is doing a SWOT analysis, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you look at where you're strong and then try and hire people who have an opposing skill set to you so that you can basically hire for your weaknesses. And that's something that I think we've done reasonably well for. And then the final stage of the business if you don't fail there, is you get to maturity. And in maturity, you start to hire junior employees that can grow the business and the company's culture, and they can hire replacements, and that expands your organization chart. You know where the business is going. At this stage, ideally, the owner who started the business could step back from the business and the business would still run. And at this stage, you're relying on your team rather than one individual. And so this is something that has massively helped us at Medix Money. And I'm going to show you a specific example of that. So back in March 2020, things were going really well at Medix Money. We were helping loads and loads of doctors, and it was going very, very nicely. I had already dropped down several days as a doctor. So I was working about 50% of my time on Medix Money and 50% as a doctor. And obviously you're thinking, March 2020, why do I remember that date? Well, the pandemic started. As soon as the pandemic started, me and Ed both went back to working as doctors, for full-time, more than full-time. We were looking after patients in the pandemic. We were making PPE for free, not selling it, for free, and we made over 100,000 items of PPE because we couldn't get PPE ourselves. And if you go to episode 3 of our podcast, you can hear that story. But as a result, we had to just completely abandon Medix Money and leave it to its own devices, because at that stage we had some subcontractors, but we didn't have any full-time employees. It was just me and Ed and a couple of subcontractors. And I actually thought that would be the end of Medix Money, but to be honest, pandemic, and I'm a doctor, that was where my sole responsibility came from. But nothing bad happened. In fact, Medix Money continued to grow without us. And I think the number one reason why that happened is because we make heavy use of automations. In the book, Michael Gerber defines this as systems, which is basically you develop a system within your business to ensure consistency, efficiency, and scalability. In the book, he uses the example of McDonald's, which is a legendary company because wherever you go in the world, McDonald's tastes the same and the experience is the same. And the reason for that is because they have systems and processes that they just replicate on a global scale, and that allows them to just develop the same product. So McDonald's is a very people-based business, has a lot of employees, and that must be really hard to scale. But the great thing about an online business is it's actually quite easy to scale if you make use of automations, because you don't need people, you just need automations. So if you search for an accountant on Medix Money, at the very start, when we were in the infancy stage, me and Ed would manually match your requirements to what we thought was the best accountant for you. Now we've developed a system, a proprietary algorithm, which matches your requirements to the best advisor for you. And it's matched over 10,000 doctors now, and we're constantly evolving it. So that is just happening automatically all the time. And so as a result, because we built in these various automations into our business at the very start, we baked them in really early. When the pandemic came, the business basically ran itself for several months while we dealt with the initial onslaught from the pandemic. And that was just because we built the business on systems and not people, so automations. And that kind of leads us on to lesson 3 from the EMyth Revisited, which is to build your business on systems and not people. He talks about the example of McDonald's and how they did it, and basically if you just build in systems, then you can make things reliable and repeatable. But what does that actually mean? Well, I've given you one example, which is building in algorithms. Another example is using SOPs. So at the start, when we were just uploading our podcast, we would just go through it ourselves. There wasn't any SOP written down. Now, all I do is record the podcast, I send it to our editor, and everything else is just automated, done by other people using our SOP. So they check that the sound is okay, edit it up, check that the guest is okay with it, think about where to schedule it. And this is all clearly documented in an SOP. And that is how we've released a podcast episode every single week, sometimes multiple episodes, for at least the last 2.5 years. I think we're on episode 170 now. So we just built these systems into the business. That became really quite important when this happened. So if you've listened to the podcast, you realize that I suffered a massive hand injury at the end of April 2023. And again, this was a point where Medix Money could have failed, because although we've implemented all these systems and processes, I like to think I'm still quite a major part of the company. But as it turns out, I'm not needed, because I was away for 5 or 6 weeks and I'm still away periodically having treatment on my hand. And yet no one notices. The machine still runs. Hundreds of you are finding a new accountant, a new financial advisor, or a new mortgage advisor on our website every single day. We're running a course teaching people how to run their finances better. We've got this YouTube channel, we've got our podcast. All of that is still running because we have a robust systems and processes. We've hired amazing people. We have an amazing team now, and they all follow our SOPs, and they're all just running the business for us, which is great. So that is another area where the business could have failed, but thankfully, whatever happens here, Medic's Money will roll on with or without me, hopefully with me. That brings us on to the fourth real lesson. And this is what Michael Gerber calls the turnkey operation. And if you're not wondering about what turnkey actually means, basically it means that a business can run smoothly without the owner's constant presence. So this is where clear guidelines, clear systems can deliver consistent results. The example in the book is of somebody who's running an auto repair, so a car repair business, and they managed to scale that from one site to a franchise by implementing systems and empowering the employees. And really, the franchise model, if you run a physical business like a cake shop or a car repair shop and you want to grow, the franchise model is a tried and tested way of doing that. But it's the ultimate test of your procedures and systems, because you've got to take what you learned building up the original site and replicate that across many different sites so that you can franchise the business. So if your processes and systems aren't absolutely 100% in that initial first business, you're never going to be able to franchise it. Now, again, why I like online businesses is actually growing Medic's Money, and we don't need to franchise it because we can just scale up using our automations and our software. And the final lesson in the book is to work on your business and not in the business. Now, this was absolutely fundamental for us at Medic's Money, and something that I personally really struggled with, because going back to the start, you'll remember at the start, you are the technician, you're doing the day-to-day work, you're the manager, you're trying to manage things, and you're the entrepreneur, you're thinking strategically. You wear those three hats initially. And as the business grows, inevitably you have to let some of those hats go. And I think I really struggled with that, because once you've built something yourself with your own bare hands, as it was at the time, now it's just hand, you feel really attached to it, and it was really difficult to let that go. But I did let it go, and we have delegated tasks so that we can grow and scale and make this business sustainable. And that is because now the majority of my time is spent working on the business, thinking strategically, building out new partnerships, thinking of new products that we can launch, rather than working in the business. I don't handle customer service emails directly anymore. I don't match people with accountants directly anymore. The algorithm takes care of that. I don't upload these YouTube videos, and I don't edit these YouTube videos because that is not an effective use of my time. Somebody else is much better at that than me. And if you just take one thing from this video, and one thing that I constantly think about, especially if you've got micromanager tendencies like myself, or if you started something by yourself and then have slowly expanded, it would be to just think about working on your business so that you can grow it, and don't get sucked into working in the business. And there's ways that you can keep an eye on the business and get into, customer feedback and things like that without doing it directly yourself. So just think about working on the business, not in the business. Awesome. I hope that was useful to you. I made this video in response to feedback from one of our previous videos, which you guys suggested you wanted to hear more about starting a side hustle and the business aspects which no one teaches us. Nobody taught me and Ed this. We learned it ourselves on the way. We narrowly avoided making mistakes, and we narrowly avoid making mistakes every single day. But I hope this video was useful for you. So if you do like it, don't forget to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. And if there's anything else you want to know about starting a side hustle, things like that, drop me a comment in the below and we will make an episode about that if enough people want it. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video.